during a fiery No King protest. U.S. Representative Jaime Raskin stormed onto the stage and unloaded on President Donald Trump, calling him a stupid, dangerous criminal in front of a crowd that was already whipped into a frenzy. But Trump, never the type to retreat, fired back later with a single sentence that didn't just embarrass Raskin, it flipped the entire story on its head. What followed left the protest crowd stunned. The moment has ignited a national firestorm, and it's going viral for reasons no one expected. The crowd erupted as Raskin climbed the rickety stage, fists pumping, veins bulging. Behind him, a banner splashed with dripping red paint read "No King," snapping violently in the Lafayette Square wind. It was June 14, 2025, the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary, and President Donald J. Trump's 79th birthday. A day meant for celebration. Instead, it was bedlam. Raskin seized the microphone like he meant to use it as a blunt instrument. His voice blasted through the speakers. "Donald Trump is a stupid, dangerous criminal. Impeach him now." The crowd, a mashup of college radicals, fringe agitators, and masked hangarounds, howled in approval. Cameras flashed, bottles skidded across pavement. An American flag smoldered in the corner. But what the crowd didn't know was that this wasn't a grassroots uprising. It was engineered, funded by deep-pocket donors, compromised politicians, and even illegal agitators who had slipped across the border only days before. Sirens wailed in the distance. Raskin kept ranting. But across town, President Trump hadn't spoken a word yet. He was watching, waiting. And when he finally responded, no one would forget it. At the U.S. Army Anniversary Parade, Trump stood tall with his hand over his heart as the national anthem played. His expression didn't move, but the weight of the moment pressed hard. It was his 79th birthday, and instead of peace, Washington was convulsing with chaos. He hadn't answered Raskin's outburst. Not because he couldn't, but because he knew something bigger was unfolding. Behind him, barons stood in uniform. Veterans, soldiers, and Gold Star families lined the streets. It should have been a flawless day. But intelligence briefings that morning had changed everything. The No King protest wasn't a protest at all. It was a setup. Violent agitators, some undocumented, moved through quiet channels, had been planted among the crowd. Their mission, destabilize the day. And at the center of the operation was Jaime Raskin. Trump's team had followed the money. Raskin and a handful of liberal power players had funneled cash into fake activist fronts, knowing those groups would torch property, destroy federal sites, and trigger panic. But Trump wasn't furious. He was focused, razor-focused. And when he finally answered, it wouldn't be with volume, but with precision. 3 hours after the protest, Trump appeared behind a podium, this time in a quiet press room. The world tuned in. Reporters froze. Twitter had already melted down. Trump leaned into the mic, eyes locked forward, and delivered a single line. Jaime Raskin isn't angry because I'm a criminal. He's angry because I caught him feeding criminals to hurt America. The room gasped. Then came the documents. Trump raised them slowly. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, sworn whistleblower testimony, all tying Raskin's office to radical protest funding networks. CNN cut to commercial. MSNBC fell silent. Social media detonated. Raskin was exposed. Trump had been right all along. The No King hoax was a setup. But what truly rocked the nation wasn't the evidence itself. It was Raskin's expression when he saw the video go viral. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He simply vanished. But Trump wasn't finished. He'd promised justice, and that justice was coming tonight. As President Trump wrapped up his single devastating sentence, the press room froze. No one moved. Even his harshest critics, the ones who normally jumped in mid-sentence, were silent. On screen, the documents he held started circulating across every network. Anchors blinked in disbelief. But the American people? They got it instantly. The evidence was painfully clear. Jaime Raskin and a handful of allies had funneled campaign funds into a so-called community outreach group. That group didn't buy books. It didn't buy food. It bought fireworks, megaphones, bricks, and bus tickets for agitators smuggled in from the border. One of them, now in custody, confessed everything. In Ohio, a mother watching the news clutched her chest. Her son, a National Guardsman, had been injured in the chaos the night before. She sobbed. "How could a congressman do this?" she whispered. Trump didn't shout. He didn't brag. He simply said, "You don't call a man a criminal when he just saved the country from your fire." And with that, he turned and walked away. For Raskin, his unraveling had only just begun. Backstage, Jaime Raskin stared at his phone as sweat pooled beneath his collar. A former staffer had sent him a single word: leaked. His knees buckled as he dropped back into a green room chair. Outside, the crowd was still chanting, "No king," but they had no idea what was about to hit them. Within minutes, the footage dropped. Not from Trump, but from a whistleblower. A private recording from a dinner weeks earlier. Raskin laughed, raising a glass with known radical financiers, saying, "Trump thinks this parade will be peaceful. We'll remind him who really controls the streets." The clip spread like wildfire. TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere at once. Millions watched. Thousands cried. In North Carolina, a young veteran who had lost his leg overseas collapsed into his wife's arms, shaking. "We fought for this country," he said, weeping. "Not for politicians like him to burn it down." Meanwhile, Trump stayed silent. He didn't need to talk anymore. The American people were talking for him. And justice was racing toward its target faster than anyone expected. Inside the Situation Room, tension buzzed through the air. Trump sat calmly at the center, surrounded by generals and legal advisors. His phone rang. The FBI director. "Sir," the voice said, "you were right. We traced the financial trail. Raskin's committee sent money into foreign crypto wallets. There's more than enough for charges." Trump didn't smile. He simply nodded. "Then it's time." Aides rushed to prepare a press release, but Trump waved them off. "No need. Let it unfold on its own. They'll tear each other apart." Back at the Capitol, Democratic leaders scrambled. Some ran for distance. Some doubled down. But Raskin? He had disappeared entirely. Outside the White House, a small group of Army veterans knelt in tears, praying for the nation. One woman hugged an American flag to her chest and whispered, "I used to doubt him. But today, I'm proud he's our president." And for the first time that night, President Trump walked into the Rose Garden and gave a silent wave to the nation. It wasn't a speech. It was a declaration. The quiet before the coming storm. Hundreds of miles away, in a small Kansas town, an elderly veteran named Harold Jennings sat beside a hospital bed. His son, Private Luke Jennings, had been struck in the spine by a thrown metal object at the No King protest. Doctors weren't sure he'd ever walk again. As Harold watched Trump's revelation play on the flickering hospital TV, his hands trembled. Then came the clip. Raskin laughing with radicals about the chaos they had planned. Harold broke. He wept uncontrollably. Not just for his injured son, but for the betrayal. He'd voted Democrat his whole life. But at that moment, something inside him shifted. This man, Trump, he tried to keep our country safe, Harold whispered to his daughter. And they tried to burn it for a headline. Tears streamed down both their faces. This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. Painfully, deeply personal. Outside the hospital window, an American flag hung at half-mast, rippling in the fading light. And for Harold, the pain in his chest turned into a quiet prayer. Let justice come fast. Back at Lafayette Square, the protest was falling apart. The same crowd that had cheered Raskin's fiery insults now stood frozen in place. Phones raised. Watching Trump's press conference stream live. Gasps. Whispers. People backing away. Others breaking into loud arguments. Then it started, a chant, soft at first, from a cluster of mothers near the back. America first. America first. A young woman who had been leading anti-Trump chants just an hour earlier dropped her sign. Tears ran down her face. She had just watched a video of her cousin, a Border Patrol agent, warning about violent illegals tied to political activist networks, the same ones Trump had exposed. The truth hit her like a gut punch. Nearby, a man in a black hoodie tried to rile the crowd again. But this time they turned on him. "You lied to us," someone shouted. "We were used," It wasn't a protest anymore. It was panic. And the man who had been mocked just hours before? He had flipped the entire nation with one sentence. Just after sunset, red and blue lights streaked across the Capitol. Federal agents swarmed a small townhouse a few blocks away. Inside, they found encrypted laptops, burner phones, stacks of foreign cash, and one of Raskin's aides trembling, caught red-handed. The media scrambled. CNN tried to spin it. MSNBC stuttered. But the footage was real, and the FBI confirmed every detail. Meanwhile, President Trump remained silent. He didn't need to say another word. His single sentence had already tugged the first thread, and the entire fabric was unraveling on its own. In the West Wing, Trump stood by a window, arms crossed, watching the Capitol lights flicker in the distance. "Sir," an aide murmured. "America's listening again." Trump didn't grin. He simply nodded. "Good," he said. "Then let's give them something worth hearing." Inside the Oval Office, President Trump sat quietly. A freshly opened envelope lay on the resolute desk. It wasn't from a staffer or a journalist. It was a handwritten note from a 4-year-old boy in Missouri, Caleb James. "Dear President Trump, my big brother is a soldier. He was at the parade. Proud. Then people at the protest started throwing stuff. He protected a little girl and got hit in the face. I heard what that man Raskin said about you. I saw your speech. I just want to say thank you for standing strong. Caleb." Trump's hand paused over the letter. For a long moment, he said nothing. Behind him, a military advisor cleared his throat. "Sir, the networks are asking if you want to go live again." Trump glanced down at Caleb's handwriting, then looked up. "No," he said quietly. "Let them sit in the truth a little longer." And with that, he picked up his pen and began writing a reply. Outside the White House, thousands gathered, not to protest, but to sing "God Bless America." The nation wasn't collapsing, it was waking up. Meanwhile, in a secure room beneath the Capitol, Jaime Raskin stared into a single camera lens. This was his last chance. A desperate attempt to justify everything. He tried to sound confident. The protest was peaceful. President Trump is twisting facts. This is political vengeance. But his voice cracked. His hands shook. The world had already seen too much. When the video aired, people across the country stopped what they were doing to watch. By the end, they weren't outraged. They were disappointed. Even Raskin's former allies began stepping away, fast. News anchors lowered their voices. One former Democratic strategist finally admitted on live TV. "We were told the protest would be symbolic, not violent. If what Trump revealed is real, we crossed a line." Meanwhile, the comments under Raskin's video poured in like a flood. "My son's in the hospital because of your protest. You called him a traitor. But he brought the truth. We trusted you. Not anymore." Buried somewhere in that avalanche of heartbreak, Raskin stared at the screen. His lips trembled, and in a whisper no one heard but himself, he said, "What have I done?" That night, storms rolled over Washington. Wind ripped through Lafayette Square. Most protest signs lay scattered, soaked, and forgotten. But one thing remained. An American flag, gently placed at the base of the Washington Monument. A note pinned underneath it read, "For the soldiers who stood tall when others didn't." A little girl in a raincoat stood nearby, crying softly. Her father, a Marine, had been injured in the chaos. A news crew tried to speak to her, but she only pointed at the flag and whispered, "He loves that." Back at the White House, Trump was briefed on the scene. He said nothing for a long, heavy moment. Then, just before midnight, he stepped onto the White House balcony, looked out over the city and saluted. There were no cameras, no audience. It wasn't a performance. It was for the country. The flag still flew, and so would the truth. In a small New Jersey apartment, Maria Delgado held her 6-year-old son tightly. The night before, he had asked her, "Mom, why did the men break the windows at Daddy's work?" Her husband, Officer Felix Delgado, had nearly died protecting civilians during the No King protest. He'd been struck in the head by a metal rod. Thrown by a masked agitator the FBI now confirmed had crossed the border weeks earlier, part of the chaos network tied to Raskin's team. Maria wiped her tears as Trump's broadcast replayed on their old TV. Raskin didn't protest for justice, Trump had said. He protested because I exposed his web of lies, and the ones he paid to do his dirty work. Maria whispered, "Thank you, Mr. President," as her son clutched a tiny American flag from his father's locker. That night, she cried until her voice broke, not because of what Trump said, but because he finally said what no one else dared to. Across D.C., a quiet moment shattered when an agitator hurled a stone at a military veteran near the Capitol. But this time, something had changed. Bystanders didn't cheer. They booed. Some even tackled the protester themselves before police arrived. News cameras caught all of it. One clip went viral instantly. A black teenager holding the veteran's hand, shouting at the attacker, "He fought for you, man." People began realizing they'd been misled. That the No King protest wasn't about rights or freedom, but about chaos and manipulation. And all it took to expose it was one sentence. Trump hadn't screamed. He hadn't attacked. He hadn't used anger. He simply told the truth. And now, the people were doing the rest. What began as rage was turning into remorse. The streets, once filled with smoke, were now filled with voices of unity, shame, and heartbreak. Then, at 7:33 p.m., every major network lit up with a breaking alert. A whistleblower, a young woman named Rebecca, formerly on Raskin's digital team, had come forward. She brought files, emails, chat logs, strategy memos. They revealed, without question, that Raskin and his inner circle had planned for the protest to appear organic while planting operatives to ignite chaos. In one message, Raskin even wrote, "Let Trump look calm. The crazier we make the streets, the more the media blames him." Rebecca's voice shook during her interview. "I joined thinking we were helping people, but this was evil, and I couldn't live with it anymore." Millions watched in stunned silence. Some cried. Some apologized online for doubting Trump. And deep in the West Wing, Trump watched too. Arms folded, face steady. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't have to. He didn't need to say anything. America was waking up. At Jefferson Elementary in Arizona, the principal paused morning assembly. A substitute teacher, a retired Marine named Mr. Harlan, had asked to speak. He stepped forward before a room of 4th and 5th graders, his hands trembling. Not from nerves, from memory, from pain, from pride. "Yesterday," he began, "some of you might have seen scary things on TV. Shouting, fires, a man calling our president a moron." The room fell silent. "But I want you to know something," he continued. "Real strength isn't yelling the loudest. Real strength is standing for the truth, even when the world laughs at you." A little girl raised her hand. "Wasn't it President Trump's birthday too?" Mr. Harlan smiled softly. "Yes. And while people threw rocks, he stood in silence for all of us." Later that day, the children drew thank you cards addressed to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. One had a large heart on it with the words, "You're not a moron, Mr. Trump. You're my hero." When the stack reached the White House mailroom that afternoon, staffers cried. This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. Across the country, Senator Dale Lockwood sat alone in his dark office, watching the Raskin revelations explode across 5 news channels at once. He wasn't close to Raskin, but he had supported the No King protest with donations and quiet backing. And now, it was burning a hole straight through him. An aide knocked softly. "Senator, we're being flooded with calls. People are furious." Lockwood nodded. "I know." He turned back to the screen. Rebecca, the whistleblower, was testifying live. Her voice shook as she said, "They wanted Americans to think Trump was the danger, but they were the ones planning it." Lockwood rubbed his eyes. His granddaughter had been in that protest crowd. She could have been hurt. She could have been killed. He picked up the phone and called the Department of Justice. "Do what you have to do," he whispered, "even if it's one of our own." For the first time in his long political career, he wept. In a small town outside Pennsylvania, an American flag was folded and handed to a grieving mother. Her son, Officer David Ree, had died protecting a government building set on fire by a No King agitator. As the bagpipes played, President Trump arrived quietly, unannounced. The crowd parted. The mother, shaking, tried to stand, and collapsed into his arms. He believed in you, she sobbed. He said you were fighting for us. Trump didn't speak. He simply held her. Across the country, the live stream of the funeral cut through every political line. People cried. People shared it. People apologized. The image of a shattered mother in the arms of her president said more than any speech ever could. This was no longer left versus right. It was truth. It was pain. It was a nation trying to heal, and justice was knocking at Raskin's door. Near the Lincoln Memorial, a CNN reporter was interviewing bystanders when something unexpected happened. A small boy, no older than 9, tugged on the microphone. He wore a red cap that read Army Strong and had dried tears streaked across his cheeks. His name was Jordan. His father had been one of the soldiers injured while protecting a federal monument on the night of the protest. The reporter knelt down. "Why are you here, Jordan?" The boy looked straight into the camera. "Because Mr. Raskin lied," he said quietly. "My dad got hurt because of his protest. But President Trump..." He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He told the truth. The crowd around them grew silent. Jordan continued, his voice trembling. "I want to be like President Trump, not because he's powerful, but because he's brave enough to speak up when bad people lie." That moment was shared over 50 million times in just a few hours. Even people who once mocked Trump went silent. No hashtags. No shouting. Just one little boy reminding America what the truth sounds like. On the corner of 12th and 8th Street, a historic church stood in heavy silence. Normally filled with music and light, it was now packed with mourners. 3 parishioners had died in the protest fires after their van was mistakenly targeted by rioters hired to escalate the chaos. Inside, Reverend Wilkins stood at the pulpit. He didn't talk politics. He didn't point fingers. He looked out at the grieving faces and said, "We were told this was a fight for justice. But justice doesn't burn churches. Justice doesn't leave children without parents. Truth does not wear a mask and light a match." As the organ played a low hymn, a woman in the third pew collapsed in sobs. Her son had begged her not to attend the protest. He said something felt wrong. Through tears, she whispered. He was right. And at that exact moment, as the church bells rang outside, someone played Trump's now legendary sentence through a speaker near the gate. Everyone on the block froze to listen. "Raskin isn't angry because I broke the law. He's angry because I exposed his." Just before sunset, something happened in D.C. that hadn't occurred in years. A line of aging veterans, some in wheelchairs, some missing limbs, began marching silently from Arlington to the Capitol. No chants, no signs, just the steady sound of boots and wheels on pavement. A Marine veteran named Curtis carried a flag over his shoulder. He hadn't walked that distance in over a decade. When asked why he came, he simply said, "I buried friends for this flag. I won't let politicians disgrace it with lies and fire." Thousands joined behind them. Old, young, Democrat, Republican, even immigrants who had earned their citizenship marched shoulder to shoulder. When they reached the Capitol steps, a speaker played Trump's sentence again. But this time, it wasn't about Trump anymore. It was about every American who had suffered in silence finally finding the courage to speak. And Jaime Raskin? He was nowhere in sight. Hidden in a private hotel room under an alias, Jaime Raskin sat hunched over a desk littered with legal memos and cold room service trays. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. Then it rang again. This time the caller ID was unmistakable. Justice Dept. He answered, barely above a whisper. "Mr. Raskin," the voice said coldly, "we have the evidence, foreign transactions, wire transfers to known radicals, encrypted group threads. You're going to be indicted." Raskin said nothing. He couldn't. The voice continued. "You tried to use chaos to win a message war, but all you proved is that you were willing to let Americans bleed for political theater." Silence. Then the final blow. And America believes Trump now. Even the ones who never did before. Raskin hung up the phone, buried his face in his palms, and began to sob. Not from guilt, but because he finally knew it was over. At a small candlelight vigil in South Carolina, a grandmother named Elsie Simmons stood up to speak. She wasn't a public figure, just a mother who had lost her son, a National Guard medic, during the courthouse fires. She held a picture of him in one hand and a Bible in the other. With trembling voice she said, "I don't care who you voted for. But when a man like President Trump stands and tells the truth, while others light fires, we have to listen." The crowd bowed their heads. A young woman streamed it live. Within hours, the clip had 18 million views. The top comment read, "I cried harder at this than anything this year. I was wrong about Trump. I see it now. America wasn't just listening anymore. America was feeling the truth. And it was breaking them, in the best way." At 9 p.m., President Trump appeared again. No podium, no stage. Just a chair, a flag, and the truth. He looked straight into the camera. "Yesterday I turned 79, he said. "I spent it at the Army's 250th anniversary parade. While some politicians tried turning our streets into war zones, Jaime Raskin called me a moron. He demanded my impeachment. But now the truth speaks louder than insults." Asterisk, asterisk. He paused. Raskin's lies hurt real Americans. But justice is here. Not because I screamed, but because I stood tall. Then he held up one thing, a thank you drawing from the kids at Jefferson Elementary. "This means more to me than any title, because America's children deserve to grow up in truth, not terror." Millions cried watching, and somewhere in a shadowy room, Jaime Raskin watched too, pale, shaking, as the walls finally closed in. It was supposed to be a routine morning news segment. Channel 5 invited Linda Hayes, mother of a slain Capitol security guard, to share her story. No one expected what followed. She sat in silence for a moment, clutching a folded flag. The anchor asked gently, "Linda, is there anything you'd like to say to America?" Her lips trembled. Through tears she whispered, "My son believed in decency. He died doing his job because a congressman wanted to create a show." The studio fell silent. Even the camera crew wiped tears from their eyes. Linda pulled out a crumpled note, her son's last message. "Mom, if anything happens, tell President Trump to never stop fighting. He's doing it for us." The clip went viral in under an hour. Top comments poured in. "I can't stop crying. I judged Trump too harshly. This mother's pain is America's pain." And Jaime Raskin's name, once attached to defiance, was now tied permanently to grief. By late afternoon, Congress called an emergency hearing, not to defend Jaime Raskin but to investigate him. Republicans and moderate Democrats sat united, documents and whistleblower testimony stacked in front of them. Millions watched live. The evidence was undeniable. Foreign funding, coordinated violence, internal memos tying Raskin's team to hired agitators, anti-police rhetoric, a deliberate plan to provoke chaos. Then a video played, a never-before-seen clip of Raskin joking during the planning. "Let the parade go on. We'll light the fire while they salute their flags." A gasp rippled through the chamber. One Democratic senator whispered, "We were lied to." The chairman looked into the camera. "This is no longer about party. This is about betrayal." Outside, Americans wept, not out of hatred, but heartbreak. Something sacred had been exploited, and Trump had been the only one bold enough to name it. Just after 6:45 p.m., President Trump walked onto the White House lawn. He hadn't planned to speak again, but after the hearing, the world wanted a word from the man who predicted it all. He held no notes. "Raskin didn't just try to impeach me," he said. "He tried to tear the soul out of this country. But America doesn't belong to liars. It belongs to those who love her enough to defend her, even when they're mocked for it." Asterisk, asterisk. He turned toward a row of veterans standing in salute. "To the soldiers, to the mothers, to the children who prayed for truth, this moment belongs to you." He paused, then delivered the line that made even news anchors cry live on air. "Those who tried to burn our flag only made this country shine brighter." It wasn't vengeance, it was national redemption. By sunrise, the courthouse in D.C. was surrounded not by protesters but by everyday Americans, veterans, teachers, farmers, families. Inside, Jaime Raskin stood pale and silent before a federal judge. The prosecution laid out the final evidence: foreign funds, hired chaos, plots against law enforcement, and coordinated attempts to destabilize the nation. The judge didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Mr. Raskin, you endangered lives, divided a nation, and weaponized trust for political gain. You will be held fully accountable under the law. The gavel fell. Raskin was convicted. The nation watched live. Some cried in relief. Others in closure. Even former critics of Trump posted, "I used to think he was the villain. I was wrong. Today, he saved our country." And somewhere in a modest Texas home, an elderly veteran saluted his TV screen and whispered, "Happy birthday, Mr. President." All across America, in homes, schools, once divided communities, flags rose again, not in defiance, but in honor. In Florida, a young boy pinned his grandfather's war medal to his jacket before school. In Chicago, a vandalized church reopened with candles beneath a hand-drawn banner. Truth outlives noise. Back at the White House, Trump received one final surprise, a compilation of thousands of letters from mothers, soldiers, and children thanking him for standing strong when others were afraid. One letter read, "You didn't fight with hate. You fought with proof. You gave us hope again." Trump stood by the window, holding that letter in silence as people outside gathered, not to protest, but to sing, "America the Beautiful." For the first time in years, the country felt whole again. That evening, Trump addressed the nation one last time about the events of the past 48 hours. No teleprompter, no applause, just him and the truth. Asterisk, asterisk. Jaime Raskin called me a moron. That didn't bother me. What bothered me were the lives broken by his lies. But today, America stood up. You stood up. You brought back honor, justice, and truth. Asterisk, asterisk. He paused. Then came the line that made the entire room weep. "I didn't defend myself to protect a title. I did it for every mother who buried a child, for every soldier who stood in fire, for every kid who drew me a flag and called me a hero." The screen faded to black. In the silence that followed, millions cried. In homes, hospitals, living rooms, and lonely corners of the night.